Go ahead, Sheriff.
All rise.
Thank you, Sheriff. You all may be seated. Sir, I'll remind you as you take your seat, you're still under the oath that I gave to you previously. Mr. Lewis, you may continue your direct examination whenever you're ready.
Mr. O'Donnell, for the break, we had gone through all the crime scene photographs, and you're going to start to describe for us all the physical evidence that you collected from the scene. So if you can go ahead and do that for us now.
Can you repeat? I didn't catch it all.
Yes. What physical evidence did you collect from the scene?
I had the fired cartridge cases, which there were 13 of. I collected the wallet, the gun holster, the firearm, the magazine, the cartridges in the firearm.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just so we're clear, the firearm that you're talking about is from the vehicle, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The firearm for the vehicle, the magazine with it, and the cartridges that were loaded in the magazine. I also swabbed the grips of that firearm and the trigger, the slide, and I also swabbed the magazine for potential DNA. I collected the white pillow with apparent blood and then the leopard print blanket that was on the ground.
I'll show you what has been marked as State Exhibits number 90 through 102. You could take a look at those and tell the members of the jury whether or not you recognize what they are.
Yes, these are the 13 Hornady 357 SIG fired cartridge cases that I collected along with the fired bullet.
Okay, and the fired bullet, for record purposes, is going to be State Exhibit number 103. And if you could also take a look at State Exhibits number 104 and 105 and tell us what those are.
These appear to be projectiles that were recovered at the autopsy.
Okay, so as pertains to State Exhibits number 90 through 103, these were all evidence that you collected from the scene that morning, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how did they get to court here today?
I brought them here.
Okay. And as far as State Exhibits numbers 104 and 105 from the autopsy, how did they get to court today?
I brought them here.
Okay, and where did they come from?
I checked them out of the DPD property room.
This time the state's going to offer State Exhibits number 90 through 103. And we're going to offer the envelopes that contain in State Exhibit number 137 for record purposes only. Attendance to counsel. Yeah, we're going to also offer State Exhibits number 104 and 105 for all purposes, and the envelope that contains it, 138 for record purposes only.
Judge, I have no objections to the state's exhibits.
90 through 105 are admitted for all purposes. 137 and 138 are admitted for record purposes.
And I'll pass it with you, Sean.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. O'Donnell, did you say that you're a civil employee, is that correct?
A civilian employee, yes.
Civilian employee. I just want to refer to you in a correct and respectful response. Mr. O'Donnell or Officer O'Donnell, since you're a civilian employee, do you go by officer?
No, just Mr.'s fine.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you this, or let me start off by asking you this. When you first get to a crime scene, I guess we'll say, what's your kind of first job that you do when you get there?
The first thing I do when I get there is I seek out responding officers and or detectives. I make contact with them to find out exactly what it is that they responded to, what it is that they saw, and anything such as evidence that they may have seen while they were out there.
Okay. And do you ever do a walkthrough or walk to assess what all has happened based off of what they tell you?
Yes. Normally after I get information, I'll have them kind of walk me through the scene. That gives them the opportunity to do both kind of talking and then showing what it is that they found.
Okay, when you walk through these scenes and they're showing you everything that's out there, this is before you start taking photographs, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and when you first get onto a crime scene, a lot of times you'll take photographs of things that later become irrelevant or things you take too many photos, right?
I wouldn't say that you can take too many photographs, but
Okay.
yes, you could take stuff that may be important later or it may not be important later.
And you do that just because you're trying to assess the whole scene. You don't know if something's relevant or not, and ultimately maybe that's determined later on after the investigation's complete. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
Okay. And in this situation, you did that after speaking with officers and assessing the scene. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and I guess you were aware that in that, the scene, the situation had been ongoing, and it had been some time that had elapsed between the time that shots were fired there and the time that you got there. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And while in that elapsed time, there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts going on at that crime scene, correct?
Correct.
And just like Mr. Lewis asked you regarding the casings, things like that, as casings are coming out of a firearm, they could be bouncing around, they could hit something, if people are moving around, they could get kicked around. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
Okay. Do you do measurements at crime scenes that you show up at?
On this one, CSA Francisco Gonzalez did the measurements and completed the computerized diagram.
Okay. And as that crime scene analyst, CSA, is that what
Yes.
stands for? Okay.
Yes.
So Mr. Gonzalez did measurements in this case?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know if he does measurements based off where things ended up or where people tell him that things are?
It's where they are when we arrive and where we find them.
Okay. So if for some reason a car is in one location but originally it was in another location, the measurements would only be off of where the car was when y'all arrived, correct?
Correct.
Okay. May I approach this witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. O'Donnell, I want to show you what's been previously admitted as State's Exhibit 16 and State's Exhibit 17. You recognize those photos because you took those, correct?
Correct.
In State's Exhibit number 16, we can see that there are spots of glass in that picture, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and when you took that picture, did you make any observations about those particular spots of glass or how that broken glass got there, anything like that?
The observations, again, are just based on what I see when it's there. That's where it is when I arrive.
Okay. Just based off of your training and experience as an officer with broken glass, you can see in State's Exhibit 16 that there's broken glass in the passenger window, correct?
Correct.
And then there's broken glass, what appears to be several feet in front of the black Journey vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Based off your training experience, it's fair to say that that vehicle potentially and probably was at least in that area where the broken glass was in front of it at some point.
Yeah, it's possible, yes.
Okay. And as we see the broken glass back by the vehicle, could have been broken there, or as the window is shattered in State's Exhibit 16, could have fallen out as the vehicle's rolling back. Is that a fair assumption to make?
That's fair.
So your photograph or your picture of State's Exhibit 16 shows where the vehicle ended up, but not necessarily where that vehicle started, correct?
Correct.
Judge, may I approach this witness again?
You may. You have continuing permission to develop the testimony of any witness, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. O'Donnell, I want to show you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 16. I'm sorry, State's Exhibit 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes.
And those fairly and accurately depict the scene that night or the early morning hours of that day?
Yes.
At this time, State would offer State's Exhibits 17 through 21. I'm sorry, Defendant's Exhibits. Thank you.
No objection.
17 through 21 for the defense are admitted for all purposes. You may
Permission to call,
publish.
Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Mr. O'Donnell, I'm showing you State's Exhibit 17. Sorry, Defense Exhibit 17. What's that photograph of?
That's a photograph of the marked patrol vehicle.
Okay, and we can see the black hood in that picture, and is that that Dodge Journey that we discussed earlier?
Yes.
Okay, and you kind of see, and that's after you got there, so after that vehicle had stopped, correct?
Correct. That is how we saw it.
Okay. I want to show you Defense Exhibit number 18. Let me, before I get into talking about 18, you started taking photographs of the scene and then eventually you worked your way into photographs inside that car, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the Defense Exhibit 18, is that a photograph that you took in this case?
Yes.
And does that, I want to particularly draw your attention by what appears to be the seat belt buckle, I guess you could say, what the seat belt goes into. Does that appear to be a cracked cell phone?
Yes.
And did you find cell phones in this Dodge Journey?
Yeah, I believe there was the one on the seat, and then there's one on the right front floorboard.
Okay. Do you remember exactly how many you found?
There were those two, and then wrapped up or inside that leopard blanket, there was a third one.
Okay. I want to show you Defense Exhibit number 20. Is that just a closer picture of that cell phone in the seat there?
Yes.
Defendant's Exhibit number 19. What is that?
That's the cell phone that was on the right front floorboard.
Okay. And that's the one that you just were referring to?
Correct.
Okay. Then I want to show you Defendant's Exhibit 21. What is that?
That was that leopard print blanket, and when I went to collect it, I was opening stuff up, and that was what was inside.
That cell phone there was inside that leopard print blanket?
Yes.
Okay. And did you collect those items?
I released those to Detective Richardson.
Okay, so you fair enough to say you collected them and then you gave them to Detective Richardson?
Yeah, but they were given to him right then and there.
Okay.
So after I photographed them and picked them up, they're handed over to him right then and there.
So you documented them through photograph and then you gave them to him?
Correct.
Mr. O'Donnell, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Defendant's Exhibit 24. You talked about Mr. Gonzalez doing measurements in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Is Defendant's Exhibit number 24, is that the diagram that Mr. Gonzalez did in this case?
I do not believe so.
You don't believe that this is the diagram that he
I mean,
did?
these are the ones that I have that he did.
None of those that you have show any measurements on them though, correct?
The only measurements that are on these is on this one. But it does not, I don't have one that looks exactly like that.
Okay. And so in referring to what you have, the measurements that Gonzalez did appear to be just the measurements of the parking lot. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's depicted on here.
Okay, but no measurements as to distance between vehicles or distance to other items or anything like that, just the outside of the parking lot, basically the fence line.
Fair enough.
Okay. Judge, I would just offer Defendant's Exhibit number 24 for record purposes.
No, it's for great purposes only.
Defense 24 is admitted for record purposes only.
Mr. O'Donnell, you specifically testified earlier that you did some swabs on the gun that was found in the car, correct?
Correct.
Okay, can you just describe to the jury what a swab is and what you're doing with swabs?
Swabs, Q-tip, are just Q-tips. What we have are regular size Q-tips. They're injected in the body of them. There's a little couple drops of water that's injected into them when they're manufactured. And then they have a break-off end on one end and then the dry end on the other. You pull them out of the package, you break the one end, it releases the water, it pre-moistens the dry end. You just take them and then you rub them over the item or whatever you're intending to try to pick up DNA from.
Okay, and you said you're trying to pick up DNA from an item in that situation, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you said that you did this with, I think in your report, you have an item number 16, which is the 9mm gun that was found in the suspect vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You particularly described certain locations of swatting the grips, the trigger, the slide, and the magazine, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit number 65. Is that a picture of what you have labeled as item 16 in your report?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the, like we said, the 9mm firearm that was found in that suspect vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Can you just describe for the jury when you talk about the slide and swabbing the slide, what, is that what you titled as item 16I?
Yes.
Okay. And can you show or indicate to the jury exactly where the slide is?
Yeah.
That top part of the gun, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And why would you swab the slide or the top part of that gun?
Because the gun, when you're swabbing, you're anything that's gonna be potentially handled by somebody. When guns are loaded, a lot of times let's start. Usually when you load a gun like this, it's gonna look similar to the photograph where the slide's gonna be back in the locked position. After you load the magazine, at some point, you're either gonna hit one of those black buttons that's gonna release the slide, but most commonly, a lot of people will actually grab the slide and yank it back to release it.
Okay, and so, for purposes of someone operating a gun, when you put that loaded magazine, let's say you have a magazine that's full of bullets, and you put it in the bottom of the gun, it doesn't automatically just chamber that bullet, correct?
I don't know that I can say that for sure.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, with your training and experience in law enforcement, if someone were to operate the gun, at some point after that magazine goes in, they either have to hit a button or slide why we call it the slide back so that one of the bullets chambers into the firearm, correct?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay, so someone using a firearm at some point would potentially have to slide it back. Correct? If they don't slide it back and they pull the trigger, are you aware that once the trigger's pulled, if it doesn't fire, that a bullet then could go into the chamber?
It's possible.
Okay. So just because a bullet's not in a chamber doesn't mean that a loaded firearm is just null and void and not dangerous. Is that a fair assumption?
That's fair.
Okay. I want to talk to you so you said in your report that, I'll just put item 16 was the gun, right? The 9mm?
Yes.
Okay. And then from that item, the swabbings that you took, and you said 16I was the swab of the slide on that gun, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You took another swabbing, which you titled 16J, and that was from the magazine of the gun, correct?
Correct.
So 16J is swab of magazine. And on State's Exhibit number 16, when you talk about the magazine, you're talking about this, some people refer to it as a clip, but what holds the bullets, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, you're looking for DNA to see if somebody potentially touched it or handled it or something like that, right?
Correct.
You also took another swab of, I think you said grips?
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And the grip, is that basically the handle of the gun?
Correct.
And when you say grips, did you take a swabbing of both sides of that or just one side?
It's a global swab of both, of the whole thing, of the
Okay.
whole, the grips, both sides.
So basically that broken Q-tip that you told this jury about, when you swab the handle of that gun, you swab it and you just use the same Q-tip on both sides of it?
Correct.
Okay. And again, you're looking for DNA to see if somebody has touched it, handled it, something like that, correct?
Correct.
And why do you do that? Why do you look for something like that?
We're just collecting evidence to possibly determine who may have handled the firearm.
Okay, and so someone may have handled it, and you can't tell, and you don't know from that on at what point they handled it. Could be relatively recent, immediate, or could be a week before.
Fair enough.
Okay, but at some point they touched it or handled it.
Correct.
Okay. And I think when you get the grips, you said that you, I think titled that 16G, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's the swab of the grips. And then you did a final swabbing of this gun that you labeled 16H, is that correct?
Correct.
And what part of the gun was that?
The trigger.
The trigger. Why is that important, or why is that something that you want to know about?
It can, again, it's looking to see who potentially may have handled the firearm, potentially who may have fired the firearm, potentially who may have tried to fire the firearm.
Okay. And again, you can't tell at what point in time they used it or handled it or fired it or touched it, fair to say?
Fair to say.
And just so that we're all clear, in State's Exhibit 65, the trigger's that black mechanism that comes down in the loop of the gun, correct?
Correct.
And this was in, you said, the suspect vehicle? Is that correct?
Where I had found it was in the trunk of that marked patrol car.
The information that you were given, did it come from the suspect vehicle?
I believe so, yes.
There was one final item that you swabbed regarding the holster that was found. Is that correct? I think it's your item 15.
Yeah, I collected the holster, but I didn't swab
You
it.
didn't swab that?
No.
Okay. These items, well, let me ask you this. I've marked this exhibit as defendant's exhibit number 24. Do you feel that this would aid the jury in understanding your testimony about the particular areas of the gun that you swabbed?
Sure.
Okay. At this time, I would offer defendant's exhibit number 24.
It needs to be 25. 24 was this.
Oh, I'm sorry, for record purposes, so 25, I'm sorry. I'm about to put the new number.
No objection.
Defense Exhibit number 25, which is a butcher sheet, butcher paper with some writing on it, is admitted. You may publish.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Guess it's already published.
These items that you, or these swabbings that you collected, what did you do with those after you collected them?
They were transported back to our office. They were packaged, and then they were sent. Everything except for the wallet that was collected was sent to the Swift's Crime Lab.
Okay, and SWIS stands for Southwest Institute of Forensic Sciences.
That's correct.
And I guess another term, the crime lab, or the crime lab that Dallas County uses to examine certain items using scientific methods.
Correct.
In this situation, I guess it'd be a DNA lab.
Yes.
DNA
Yes.
lab. Your Honor, I'll pass the witness at this time.
Mr. Lewis,
No further question, Your Honor.
may this witness be finally excused.
No objection.
Very good. Sir, you're excused from any further service in this matter. Make sure you don't take any exhibits. You don't have any exhibits up there, do you?
I don't think
I have this stuff, but
Those weren't admitted.
they're not admitted.
Those sheets of paper is really what I'm concerned about.
These
Make
go
su-
with the evidence.
Okay.
This is my report, and then. I
Could you
have-
just make sure for me that none of those papers have any stickers on them? And Mr. Lewis, you can grab your next witness. If they have exhibit stickers on them, then they belong to this ward.
Your Honor, based upon our conversation, we'd like this witness to be available if needed.
The one that was just on the stand?
Yes, sir.
Sure, just make sure you get word to him. Is this your next witness, Mr. Lewis?
The state calls Marshall McLemore.
Very good. Come on up here, please. If you would please, before you have a seat on the witness stand, could you turn to face me and raise your right hand? Swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth.
Yes, sir, I do.
Please have a seat. Responding to questions from Mr. Lewis and also Mr. Harris, who's on your left. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good. Please introduce yourself to the jury by stating your name and spelling it for the court reporter.
My name is Marshall McLemore. It's MarshallMcLemore.
Mr. McLemore, how are you currently employed?
By the city of Dallas as a police officer and a crime scene detective.
And how long have you been with the Dallas Police Department?
Over 29 years.
And how long have you been a crime scene detective?
In May, it'll be 15 years.
All right, could you please describe your duties for the members of the jury?
As a crime scene detective, I respond to crime scenes. We document the scene with photographs. We collect evidence, process evidence, package evidence, and send it where it needs to be processed.
Okay, and do you recall responding to a call with regards to an Austin Block shooting on January the 18th, 2017?
Yes, sir, I do.
And where did you respond to initially?
Baylor Hospital.
Okay, did you respond with anybody else or were you alone?
I responded with my supervisor, Jim Spalding.
Okay, and what was the purpose of you responding to the hospital?
That's where the individuals that were involved in the shooting, that's where they were transported to.
And how many individuals were there?
There was two.
Okay, and what did you find when you got there to the hospital?
There was a male and a female that were both victims in the shooting.
Okay, and you come to learn that the male victim was a Virgilio Rosales
I did.
and the female was Genevive Dawes.
I did.
Okay, and what did you do when you got to the hospital?
I photographed both of the individuals at the hospital, collected their clothing, and then I responded to Eastside.
Can you describe the condition of the male complainant that you came into contact with, Mr. Rosales?
He was laying in a hospital bed in trauma room 4. He had a neck brace on his neck, and he had injuries to the right side of his head and face and his right arm.
Can you describe the injuries that you observed?
There were scattered injuries across his side of his face and on his arm.
Okay. What about the female complainant? What was her condition?
She was deceased, and she'd already been placed in a body bag and placed in a holding room.
And what kind of injuries did you observe on her, if any?
I observed several defects consistent with bullet impacts in her face, neck, shoulder, left shoulder, and right arm.
And so you said that you seized their clothing.
I did.
What did you end up doing with the clothing?
I sent it to Swift's as I was directed to by Detective Dale Richardson.
Okay, and Swift's is the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences?
Yes, yes, sir, it is.
The crime lab here in Dallas?
Correct.
Okay. And what did you do after you left the hospital?
I went back to the office and packaged the firearms and the clothing to be shipped to Swift's.
Okay, let's talk about the firearms. Did you respond to a second location after you left the hospital?
I did.
Okay, where was that? That was to the actual location, correct?
It was.
4700 East Side, Dallas?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what did you do when you got to that scene?
The crime scene van was there, which is basically a big box truck. It was already at the scene, and I photographed and did a weapons inventory of the officers involved in this incident.
Okay, how many officers did you do weapons checks on?
6.
Okay. Which officer did you come into contact first, if you recall?
Christopher Hess.
Is that the defendant in this case?
It is.
Do you see the defendant, or do you see Christopher Hess in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you please identify him by the article of clothing that he's wearing?
He's wearing the blue shirt and the gray coat.
This witness, may the record with this witness has identified the defendant on the court.
Record shall so reflect.
Talk to the jury about what you did with the defendant.
Repeat?
Talk to the jury, what did you do with the defendant on that day?
Oh, I asked Christopher Hess and his attorney to step into the crime scene van. And at that time, we also had a crime scene analyst that was in training. So we're gonna do a weapons inventory and photographs of him, so I showed her how that was to be done. So I had Christopher Hess to fill out a paper bag with his name and badge number on it. He then held it up. I photographed him holding it. I then did a 360 view of to show that he was in full police uniform with his name and his badge number, the weapons that he was carrying with him at that time. Then I did a weapons inventory of his service weapon.
What is weapons inventory? What does that mean?
Basically, I photographed it the way it appeared when I removed it from his holster. I then unloaded it and photographed it to do to count the number of cartridges that were inside the weapon and chamber.
What were the results of that on the defendant's firearm?
His box magazine was empty and he had one cartridge in the chamber of the weapon.
Do you know how many rounds his magazine held?
Yes, I do. It held 12.
12 rounds.
Correct.
So for the total capacity of the weapon, including the magazine and the chamber, we're talking about 13 rounds?
Yes, sir, that'd be correct.
And I think you just testified that his magazine was empty, is that correct?
His magazine was empty.
And there was one in the chamber.
Correct.
Did he have any extra rounds on him?
He had 2 more magazines that were both full.
All right, so after you got done with the defendant, who was next?
Officer Kemper. Kemple, I'm sorry.
Okay. Jason Kemple?
Yes,
All right, and did you do the same process with him?
I did. Exactly the same.
Photographed him and then checked his weapon?
Correct.
What were the results of your inspection of his weapon?
He had 1 in the chamber and 14 out of 15 in his magazine.
Okay, so a 15 capacity magazine?
Correct.
And one was missing from the magazine?
Correct.
What about the other officers?
I inspected their weapons, did the same thing, but their weapons were all full. They hadn't been fired.
Okay, so for the record, we're talking about Officer Christopher Alish,
Yeah. Alish?
Officer Aaron Evans,
Yes.
Officer Zach Hopkins,
Correct.
and Officer Peter Littler.
Correct.
And after you got done with the weapons inspections, did you seize any evidence?
I seized Christopher Hess weapon and also Kemple. Both of their weapons, they had been discharged. I seized them for evidence.
I'm not sure if I asked you this question earlier, so let me just make sure I did. When you were at the hospital, did you take photographs of both complainants?
I did.
I'm sure you what's been marked as state exhibits 106 through 116. If you could just look through those and let me know whether or not those are the photographs you took that morning.
Yes, these are all my photographs.
Okay, do these fairly accurately depict the male complainant, Virgilio Rosales, in the hospital in Baylor that day?
Yes.
And do they also fairly accurately depict the defendant, his firearm, as well as Officer Jason Kemple and his firearm?
Correct.
At this time, the state offers state exhibit numbers 106 through 116, change of counsel for inspection.
No objection, Your Honor.
106 through 116 are admitted. Mr. Lewis, let me see you for just a minute.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Post, Your Honor?
Permission granted. It was 106 through 116, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. They're admitted. You may publish.
Thank you. We're just going to walk through these real quickly, Detective. Statement number 106, is this Mr. Rosales at Baylor Hospital?
It is.
You indicated you've seen some injuries. If you can kind of point those out to remember the jury. kind of hard to see in the photographs, but point out what injuries you saw on there.
These specks on his head, up here on his forehead, and you see some little other places where he's bleeding. It's hard to tell where some of them could be blood spatter and some are injuries, but on the other side, you can easily see.
Okay, looking at 107, is the other side you're referring to?
Right, you can see more detailed where the impacts are on, up there by his hairline and his eyebrow.
Now, were you made aware, were you given any information about this incident that took place?
Not at that time.
Okay. Would the injuries that we see in 107 be consistent with glass shattering and hitting his face?
That's what they appear to be, is glass injuries.
State Exhibit 108 shows his armband. It's Virgilio Gonzalez. Obviously, that's incorrect. You came to learn his correct name was Virgilio Rosales, R-O-S-A-L-E-S, correct?
Later on, but in my report, I did state him as Gonzalez.
Okay. State Exhibit 109, is this the defendant?
It is.
Is this the way that he would have appeared when you came into contact with him on January the 18th, 2017?
It is.
110, what is that?
That's his weapon. That's his duty weapon.
And what kind of weapon is that?
It's a Sig Sauer P226 357 Sig handgun.
111 is a closer view of the defendant's firearm, is that correct?
Right, it shows the caliber and the serial number.
Can you read out the serial number for us?
It's Union 585815.
112, another photograph of the defendant's firearm, and what is it showing?
It's showing now that the magazine is empty and there's one cartridge that was retrieved from the chamber of the weapon.
And 113, is that Officer Jason Kimble?
It is.
Is that the way that he would have appeared when you contacted him on January the 18th, 2017?
It is.
114, State Exhibit number 114, is that his firearm?
That is his firearm, yes.
What kind of firearm was he carrying that morning?
He's carrying a Glock firearm. It's a 357 Sig caliber also.
State Exhibit number 115, can you please read off the serial number for Officer Kimble's weapon?
It's Tom William Nora 103.
And finally, State Exhibit number 116, what is that showing?
That's showing what was in the magazine of Kemple's weapon.
Okay.
The one on the far top right would be the one in the chamber, and the ones in a row would be the ones that were in his magazine.
Did you also bring the firearms with you to court this morning?
Yes, sir, I did.
And I'm going to ask for some help from the bailiff on these, but going to mark. Going to ask you to open this up for us. It's no, nothing there for us. I'm going to ask the bailiff to make sure that this firearm is safe before we start handling it here in court for the jury. We're gonna label this as State's Exhibit number 117. Is this the defendant's firearm?
It is.
This time Your Honor, I'm gonna offer State's Exhibit number 117, the defendant's firearm, to the counsel.
No objection, Your Honor.
117 is admitted for all purposes.
And McLemore, is this a firearm?
Yes.
And is this firearm a deadly weapon?
Yes.
And I also asked you to bring Officer Kemple's weapon, but at this time, I'm not gonna offer it into evidence, but is that also a firearm?
It is, yes.
And is that also a deadly weapon?
Yes, sir, it is.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
One moment, Your Honor.
Yeah, but I'll take it back. It's okay.
Detective McLemore, you said that you went to the hospital and that you photographed the complainants in this case, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
One being Mr. Rosales?
Yes.
Okay. The picture that the state had showed you, I believe, had him in a neck brace. May I approach this witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
One of them appears to be State's Exhibit 106. You took that photograph, is that correct?
I did, yes.
Okay, and State's Exhibit 106, looks like he's in a neck brace, correct?
He is in the neck brace.
Okay, he's in a neck brace. You don't have any information about when they put that neck brace on him or anything like that, correct?
It was in him when I got there.
When you got there. But you don't know, would you be surprised or would you not be surprised if he didn't have the neck brace on him at any point at the offense location? Would that surprise you?
Can you repeat the question? I don't understand it.
When you arrived and you saw him, he had a neck brace on.
Correct.
Okay, but you don't know at what point that neck brace was put on him.
Correct.
And you don't know if he ever even complained of a neck injury of any sort, or if he was experiencing a neck injury.
I don't know.
Okay. Would it surprise you if he didn't have any neck injuries?
It wouldn't.
Okay. Was that, do you think, potentially a protocol or procedure that hospitals sometimes do when they take somebody in?
Or ambulance.
Or an ambulance?
Correct.
Okay, and so the fact that he did not have a neck injury, that doesn't surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Did you have any conversations with Mr. Rosales when you were taking photographs of him?
Kind of.
Kind of. I mean, the purpose for you taking photographs is just to document how he is at that time, correct?
Correct.
Did you ask him any questions about what happened or anything like that?
I did not.
I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
Judge, real quick, I had to change heart. I'm gonna go ahead and offer Officer Kemple's weapon into evidence.
Sheriff? Go ahead.
Judge, and I'm not gonna have an objection to this one, see, obviously.
What number is that, Mr. Lewis?
118. Bailiff has assured me this weapon is safe.
Hearing no objection from the defense, 118 is admitted for all purposes.
Mr. Chair, to the jury.
Go ahead.
Officer Kemple's weapon. pass the issue.
I don't have any further questions of this witness.
May he be finally excused.
No objection.
Very good. Sir, you may stand down. You're excused from any further service in this matter. Call your next witness, please.
State calls April Kendrick.
If you would please come to the front of the courtroom. And before you have a seat on the witness stand, could you raise your right hand for me? You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth. Please have a seat. Responding to questions from Mr. Lewis, whose witness will this be for the defense?
Mine.
Perhaps Ms. Madsen. You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning.
You could please state your name and spell it for the court reporter.
My name is April Kendrick, Kendrick.
And Ms. Kendrick, how are you employed?
I'm employed at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, which is also known as SWIFTS, or the Dallas County Crime Lab, as the firearms supervisor.
And how long have you been with SWIFTS?
I've been there for almost 15 years.
And what are your duties there with SWIFTS?
As the firearms supervisor, I oversee the daily functions of the firearm and tool mark unit. In addition to that, I examine firearms and fired ammunition components, which would include bullets and cartridge cases. And through those examinations and microscopic comparisons, I can determine that, in my opinion, a cartridge case or a bullet was fired by a particular gun.
Could you please explain or describe your education, your training, your experience for your position?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Master of Science in Forensic Science. In addition to that, I went through an extensive 3-year training program with SWIFTS that included participating in numerous verbal, written, and practical or hands-on exercises, as well as examinations. I participated in and successfully completed a series of competency tests, and annually I perform anywhere from about 3 to 5 proficiency tests. And those proficiency tests are essentially just looking to see if I can do the analyses that I'm assigned to do. In addition to that, I am licensed by the Texas Forensic Science Commission as a forensic analyst.
And have you testified as an expert witness before in court in the area of firearms and tool mark examination?
I have,
On few or many occasions?
many times.
Okay. Were you asked to perform an examination in this particular case under lab number IFS-17-010?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm sorry. Were you asked to perform an examination in this case under lab number IFS-17-01065?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And what were you asked to do in this particular case?
I received 2 firearms, some fired cartridge cases, and fired bullets, and I was asked to determine if the firearms were functional and if the fired evidence was fired by either one of those 2 firearms.
Okay. And were you also provided some evidence from the autopsy as well?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that?
Those were 2 bullets collected at autopsy.
Okay. How many cases, cartridge cases, were submitted to you for this particular case?
13 fired cartridge cases.
Okay. And how many bullets in the original submission from the police department?
I received a single bullet from the police department.
Please describe the 2 firearms that were submitted to you by the police department.
Okay, the first, well, I say first, but there's no sequential order, was a Sig Sauer. The model was a P226R. The caliber is a .357 SIG caliber. It's a semi-automatic pistol, and the serial number is U585815. And the second firearm was a Glock. The model is a 31 Gen 4 .357 SIG caliber semi-automatic pistol, and the serial number was TWN103, and it had an attached flashlight.
Okay. were you able to test both of those firearms to determine whether or not they were functional?
Yes,
Okay, were they?
yes, they were.
Okay, let's start with the Glock. The Glock 357, that would be your item number 017-001 with serial number TWN103. What conclusions did you come to as pertains to the analysis of that particular firearm?
For that particular firearm, the Glock, I was able to determine that a single cartridge case and the bullet collected at the scene were fired by that gun, in my opinion.
Okay. And just for the due information, are you aware, or does the police department give you any information as to where this particular evidence was found in the crime scene?
They do provide us with what is called a supplement, and it does have some information about where items of evidence are collected, but in general, I don't read through the entire supplement. I'm just going to include on my report what the packaging says, so if DPD has their own item number, I'll include that item number in my notes. But outside of that, I'm not familiar with, or I don't remember any details of where the collection was.
Okay. All right, so one case from the crime scene and then the fired bullet was you were able to match to the Glock weapon.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's move on to the 6 hours, 357 with serial number U585815. What were the results of your analysis on that firearm?
That particular firearm, I was able to determine that, in my opinion, 12 of the fired cartridge cases and 1 of the bullets from autopsy was fired by the 6 hour.
Okay. So one of the bullets from the autopsy was matched to that firearm. What about the other bullet from the autopsy?
The other bullet from autopsy was unsuitable for analysis. And what that means is the tool marks that would normally be on a bullet that I could compare to test-fired bullets were not present. So the marks that I needed for comparison weren't there to compare.
Okay. Is there anything else that you did as part of this analysis?
There was some trace evidence that I collected from one of the projectiles, or the projectile from the scene, but no additional analyses were performed on that.
Okay, what does that mean, trace evidence for the jury?
It's going to be material that is adhering to the bullet as I receive it, and I can look in my notes and tell you specifically how I documented that. I described it as an unknown black substance, so I would collect that material, put it in an envelope, and report out that I collected that material. And then if any additional analyses needed to be performed, that would be requested of the trace evidence unit. But no additional analyses were performed on that substance.
Okay. And after your analysis is done, is there a verification process that takes place?
Yes, so after I perform microscopic comparisons of the unknown evidence, the fired cartridge cases and fired bullets, to the test fires from the gun or guns, I provide that evidence to a second examiner. And then they go through a process known as blind verification. So they receive the evidence and they receive a list of comparisons that they need to perform, which are the same comparisons that I performed, and they come to their own independent conclusion. They don't know what my conclusions were when they're looking at that evidence on the microscope themselves. At the end of that process, we would then compare our conclusions to see if our conclusions were the same for each of those comparisons, and in this particular case, they were. And so the reported out conclusion is my conclusion as well as supported by a second analyst's blind verification.
Going to show you what's been already admitted into evidence as State's Exhibits numbers 90 through 103. You could please tell us whether or not you recognize what these exhibits are.
State's Exhibits 90 through 103 are, they're Ziploc bags, and they contain the evidence that I examined. And the way that I recognize them is each one of those bags, as well as the items of evidence, have the SWIFT's case number on it, as well as the item number, my initials, and the date. And all of the seals appear to be intact and have my initials and date of sealing on it as well.
Okay, so just specifically, State Exhibits number 90 through 102 would be the 13 cases that you tested against the firearms, is that correct?
Yes,
And then 103 would be the fired bullet that was recovered from the crime scene.
yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State Exhibits number 104 and 105, which have already been admitted into evidence. You can tell us whether or not you recognize those and what they are.
State's Exhibit 104 and 105 are the envelopes that contain the bullets that were collected at autopsy. And again, they're marked with the unique case number, the item number, my initials and date, and the seals appear to be intact with my initials and date.
And specifically, State Exhibit number 104 indicates that this particular projectile was recovered from the left shoulder of the victim, Genevive Dawes. And I believe that's going to be the one that you compared, were able to compare to the defendant's firearm, is that correct?
Yes, State's Exhibit 104, the envelope is marked that it was removed from the left shoulder, and that is the projectile that was identified to the Sig Sauer.
And then State's Exhibit number 105 is going to indicate that it came from the right forearm of the victim, Genevive Dawes. And this is the one that was not suitable for comparison, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted into evidence as State's Exhibits number 117. And 118. If you can tell us whether or not the makes, models, and the serial numbers are consistent with those that you examined in your report.
Yes, State's Exhibit 117 and 118 are both of the firearms that I examined in this case, and I recognize them by the serial number that's marked on the frame of the firearm, as well as the make and model information that is on the firearm.
Now, Ms. Kendrick, did you complete a report after your analysis was done?
I did?
I'm sure yours been marked as State's Exhibit number 119. Can you tell me whether or not that's the report that you completed in this case?
Yes, State's Exhibit 119 is the report that I issued on February 10th of 2017.
And do you believe this report would help the jury understand your testimony today with regards to your firearms analysis in this case?
Yes.
State Office, State Exhibit 119.
Objection.
119 is admitted for all purposes. You may publish.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, You are an employee of the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Science,
Yes.
and it's basically a crime lab, correct?
Yes, it is.
There are a number of different scientists and lab workers there, correct?
Correct?
May I approach the witness, Robert?
You may.
And one of the things that's important to you guys is you keep track of the chain of custody, correct?
Yes.
And when you were telling this jury about IFL number, it's because everything has a unique case number, correct?
Yes, it's the IFS number, but yes.
IFS, okay. I'm gonna show you defense exhibit number 27. This is gonna have the same IFS number, correct?
Correct.
And it's gonna be the gunshot residue report done.
Okay.
If you will take a look at the signature, Kara Crossway,
Yes,
she was an employee there, correct?
she was.
And you were familiar with her?
Yes.
And this appears to be in a report that she would have done at the same lab you work at with the same IFL number.
IFS number, yes.
IFS. So it would be in regards to this case, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And defense exhibit number 28 is going to be a serology report. Does it have the same IFS number?
It does.
Okay, and it's going to have the signature of Michelle Sharp. Is she one of your fellow employees and scientists?
She is.
And this appears to be a report in the same case on additional evidence.
Yes.
Defense exhibit number 29 is going to be same IFS number,
Yes.
and it's a DNA report.
Yes.
Signatures of both Courtney Ferreira and Stacy McDonald. Are they colleagues of yours?
Yes, they are.
Do you vouch for the professionalism and competency of each of these employees?
I would, yes.
Defense will offer defense exhibits 27, 28, and 29 for record purposes at this time.
No objection for record purposes, no.
27, 28, 29 are admitted for record purposes only at this time.
And Ms. Kendricks, the reason why I have to admit them for record purposes only is because you didn't perform these tests. So you can't testify to their reports, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But you vouch for these scientists, their professionalism and competency?
Yes, in as much as they are employees of the laboratory and go through the same processes that I do. They are in different units of the laboratory, though.
Let's talk a little bit about, do you know what gunshot residue testing is?
I do.
I'm going to use State's Exhibit 118 as an example, okay? And basically what gunshot residue is that when somebody holds a firearm and shoots it, there's a cloud of dust that will be expelled that contains 3 different substances. Is that correct?
There are several different varieties of gunshot residue, and one of them that you were talking about, which is examined by the trace evidence unit, is the one with the 3 components in it, correct?
3 components are going to be antimonium, barium, and lead.
Antimony, barium, and lead.
Say again.
Antimony,
Antimony,
barium,
barium,
and lead.
which is why I'm not a scientist. But those 3 items will be expelled, and it's in the area of the gun, correct?
Correct.
And it could sometimes be on the gun, correct?
It could be.
And this is something that is like a powder that leaves a residue.
It's actually a tiny little piece of metal, and yes, it can leave a residue.
And the reason why swabs are taken is essentially what it is they're little adhesive dabs that are patted on people's hands to see if any of this gunshot residue is left on someone.
That's correct. This is really outside of the scope of my daily job duties as it's performed by a different section of the laboratory.
Correct, but it's there and it's your colleague. Are you aware that when somebody receives an autopsy, one of the medical examiners will do that and dab the person's hand to see?
They do.
All 3 of those witnesses would be available to the state if the state wanted to call them, wouldn't they?
I'm going to object as a comment on how the state decides to present its evidence, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Ma'am, are those employees just down the street at the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Science?
That's where they are employed. I don't know if they're currently there today.
Pass the witness.
No further questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be finally excused.
No objection.
No objection.
Very good. Ma'am, you may stand down. You're excused from any further service in this matter. Members of the jury, it's 12 o'clock. We're going to take a break right now for lunch. So please be back inside the jury room at 1 o'clock. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves, and please do not do any independent research whatsoever on anything that you've heard in court. All rise for the jurors. Court's in recess.